Hello everyone, this is Maki. The history of space migration in the world of Gundam Unicorn differs slightly from the original Universal Century. Last time, we examined the space migration plan's overall outline and the differences in space colonies. This time, we will continue analyzing the history of space migration. As I mentioned before, how you interpret the analysis is up to you. You may view the world of Unicorn as a parallel universe diverging from the original Universal Century, or as a phenomenon in which historical facts shift based on the observer's perspective. Now, before we dive into today's topic, I'd like to make a quick announcement. I'm accepting support through memberships on my channel. For just 99 cents a month, you receive a name badge and custom stamps for your comments. Alright, let's begin the analysis. The original Universal Century space migration plan is described in the novel Hathaway's Flash. It was, of course, written by Mr. Yoshiyuki Tomino. Do you remember what we talked about last time regarding the space migration plan in Gundam Unicorn? It was based on a speech by Ricardo Masnas, the first president of the Earth Federation government. He proposed a plan to send half of humanity into space over 50 years. But how exactly was this half of humanity chosen? The answer can be found in a statement made by Marida. She said the early space pioneers were people who struggled to survive on Earth's political prisoners and those who had no other choice but to migrate to space. This aligns with what Full Frontal said the Earth's Federation government threw away the people it no longer needed into space. Of course, we shouldn't forget that she was speaking as a Neo, Zeon citizen. Nevertheless, Marida also made a more balanced remark. Here's what she said. Some interpret it as only the poor being forcibly thrown into space. But many people chose to pioneer space of their own volition. They acted with the resolve not to return until Earth's environment had recovered. In other words, not all space migrants were hopeless or forced into a life of sorrow. However, there's something worth noting in what Marida said. If we pay close attention to the meaning behind her words, we see the implication that some people remained on Earth. This implies that some people chose to stay and continue living on Earth. This is one element that differs from the original Universal Century. Now, let's take a closer look at the space migration plan from the original Universal Century. As I mentioned earlier, the plan is detailed in the novel version of Hathaway's Flash. I also discussed this in the episode titled Who is Hathaway's True Enemy? In that story, the idea is that all of humanity was to migrate into space without exception. In fact, the first volume of the Victory Gundam novel states that migration was enforced equally on all races and cultures. Although the word enforced may conjure images of the confusion and chaos that accompanied the migration policy, the space migration plan was still a policy carried out equally for all of humanity. However, there were exceptions allowing a limited number of people to remain on Earth, such as staff responsible for managing the planet's natural environment, or those tasked with preserving culture. Hathaway opposes the way some people exploit this small exception for personal gain. In the original Universal Century, the space migration plan was about all of humanity migrating to space without exception. The space immigration plan in the Unicorn world is characterized by the fact that there are two types of people: those who continue to live on Earth and those who, for some reason, choose to immigrate to space. Depending on how it is interpreted, however, the two versions do not necessarily contradict each other. One could view the unicorn version as describing an intermediate stage of the migration plan. Even in Hathaway's, Pratchett mentioned that the Earth's Federation government practically brought the space migration plan to a halt midway. Now that we've covered everything so far, how do you feel? Some of you may have concluded that the world of Unicorn is a separate universe from the original Universal Century. Since we've come this far, then let's dig a little deeper and look for more clues that could help us decide. Now, let's examine the speech by Zeon Daikon. He was Sharazanable's father and a symbol of hope for the space migrants. His speech is recorded in Volume 3 of the novel version of 0079. In it, he says, "I find it absurd that those who remain on Earth look up at the sky while trying to control the lives of those living in space." The truth is that space migrants were driven into space as separate population. Surprisingly, the words of Zeon written by Tomino contain similarities to those of Full Frontal. Using Zeon's speech as a basis for analysis, we can see that the space migration plans in the original Universal Century and Gundam Unicorn are the same, just seen from different perspectives. The space migration plan began as a well-intentioned effort to restore Earth's environment. The plan was carried out for all of humanity and all cultures equally. However, those with lower social status were the first to be sent into space. At first glance, sending the socially disadvantaged into space might seem discriminatory. But can't we also see it from another perspective? If the people with the skills and knowledge to operate the policy and maintain systems like space shuttles and mass drivers were removed from Earth immediately, wouldn't that have made it much harder to maintain a smooth migration process? Perhaps those with technological expertise chose to put themselves last and ensure that the benefits of cutting-edge science and infrastructure would first go to those most in need. In contrast, the world of G Gundam shows what happens when the opposite approach is taken. In that world, the wealthy and powerful were the first to migrate to space colonies. Meanwhile, the poor were abandoned on Earth. What are your thoughts on the Earth's Federation government migration policy? Do you agree with Full Frontal that it was a malicious policy intended to discard the vulnerable? How do you view the relationship between the original Universal Century and the world of Gundam Unicorn? I'd love to hear your opinion if you'd like. This line of research is something I plan to continue exploring. I hope you look forward to what comes next. That's all for this episode. Thanks so much for watching all the way to the end. See you next time.